The New Norm is brought to you by Winning at Home. I'm Steve Norman. Welcome to The New Norm. So when I read through the Bible, I read through it in kind of parallel tracks. So I'll start at the very beginning. I've been in Genesis. I'll start in the middle, like in the wisdom literature. Right now I'm in Proverbs. And then I'll also start at the beginning of the New Testament. So I finished Matthew and Mark, and now I am in the book of Luke. So I've started in three different places, and I'm just reading kind of one chapter a day in each of those three different places. And recently I came across this passage in Luke chapter 1 that was intriguing to me. An angel is speaking to a member of the priestly family, a guy by the name of Zechariah. And the way it worked in ancient times is that if you were born into the tribe of Levi, you were on a rotation. So wherever it was that you lived, you and your crew from your locale would go up to Jerusalem. You would serve for a season there. I'm not exactly sure if that was weeks or a couple months. And then when your turn was done, you would cycle back home and you would go back to life as you knew it. But in this one particular instance, Zechariah is on temple duty, and it's his job to actually go into the holy place and offer the incense offerings before God. And while he is in there, he has a visit from an angel who is going to let him know that he and his wife, Elizabeth, their prayers to conceive have been answered. And so in that moment, not only is he giving him the good news that they're going to give birth to a son, but that son is going to play a significant role in Israel's redemption history. The angel says that son, this is in Luke chapter 1, verses 16 and 17, he will bring back many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God. And he will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah to turn the hearts of parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. So think about that for a moment. He will go on before the Lord. They're talking about Messiah, who's going to be Jesus, in the spirit and power of Elijah. Now, later in the Jesus story, you'll hear about this moment called the Transfiguration, where Jesus invites just three of his disciples on top of a mountain, and they have this visitation of Jesus, who is transfigured into like this angelic presence. And then he is also joined by two like kind of rock stars from Jewish history, Moses, who is the giver of the law, and Elijah, who was kind of the marquee prophet of all of their history. So when the angel tells Zechariah that their son is going to arrive in the spirit and the power of Elijah, Zechariah probably couldn't help but recall the Old Testament prophet Malachi, who said, "See, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of parents to their children and the hearts of children to their parents, or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction." So it's interesting there because Malachi says, I'm going to kind of do a mutual turning. I'm going to turn parents towards children. And that word children is not necessarily age specific. It's sons and daughters. So it's not just 7, 8, 9-year-olds. It's 39, 40, and 56-year-olds. So I'm going to turn the hearts of parents to their sons and daughters and vice versa. But it's interesting when we go back to the Luke chapter 1 passage, it says, I'm going to turn the hearts of parents to their children, and I'm going to turn the hearts of the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous. He's not equating parents with the disobedient, but it is interesting that he's saying, the heart that I turn is going to be a heart that needs correcting. And what I turn it towards is going to be something that is good. That word to turn, I will turn the hearts, literally means restore, refresh, or repair. Now, in Matthew 17, after Jesus has had a conversation with the disciples, he goes, hey, to be sure, Elijah comes and will restore all things. But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but have done to him everything they wished. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands. So Jesus is saying John the Baptist was the new Elijah, and he did come to restore all things. He goes, John the Baptist was a prophet in the spirit of Elijah, and the goal of prophets in ancient times wasn't to kind of foretell the future in the way that we sometimes think about prophecy, but the goal of prophets was restoration. They wanted to restore people to God. They wanted to restore people to one another. and they wanted to restore Israel to their role as a witness, as a testament, as an evangelist to the nations about God's goodness. So when John the Baptist was doing his public ministry, this is exactly what we see him doing. We see him identifying the gap between what God is asking Israel to be and the kind of people that they have kind of settled into. In fact, one time it says that John was approached by some Pharisees, religious leaders, and Sadducees, who were some political leaders, coming to where he was baptizing in the wilderness. And he said to them, "You brood of vipers, you knot of snakes, who warned you to flee from the coming wrath? Produce fruit in keeping with repentance." It's really interesting because the idea of baptism was not unknown in ancient times. In fact, the Jewish tradition of a mikvah, or a ceremonial bath, or a little washing pool, had been hardwired into their culture for centuries. And so they were washing themselves ceremonially, but John was saying, like, look, I don't want you to just wash your bodies so that you can be ritually pure. He goes, I want you to have this be symbolic of a cleansing of your souls. That's why they said John's baptism was a baptism not of cleansing. It was a baptism of repentance. So that's why it's so interesting that he says here, he goes, I want you to produce fruit in keeping with repentance. I don't want you to say you're sorry. I want you to live that sorry out by a change in your behavior. And what I love about John the Baptist, he's doing the work of Elijah. When you read the stories of Elijah, like Elijah was crystal clear in his invitation to the people of Israel to turn away from their idols and their false gods and come back to a faith in the one true God. And John kept calling people out. John was so committed to seeing restoration happen between Israel and their God, between Israelites and one another, and Israelites and their call to be a witness to the nations, that he would call out misconduct wherever he saw it, even to his peril. In Luke chapter 3, we see that when John rebuked Herod the Tetrarch because of his marriage to Herodias, his brother's wife, and all the other evil things he had done, Herod added this to them all, and he locked John up in prison. John's willingness to call out gaps, John's desire to see hearts turned back to obedience, back to surrender, back to right relationship with God and one another, it cost him his life. But John was trying to set the stage for Jesus. He was trying to pave the way. He was trying to embody the ethic that's articulated in Ezekiel chapter 36, where the prophet Ezekiel represents God to, again, a rebellious Israel, and says, I will give you a new heart and I will put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone. I'll give you a heart of flesh. If you let me, I'll turn your heart. I'll restore it. I'll refresh it. I'll jumpstart it. I'll repair it. And I think that we desperately need a moment where God turns the hearts of parents to children again. My colleagues, Peter Newhouse and Alan Seaborn, are writing a book with our founder, Dan Seaborn, about parents and adult children who have gotten sideways with one another, either because of their disagreements about faith or culture or politics. And my guess is you don't have to look very far to find a relationship that fits that description, either in your own family or in your relational network. And I think that the reason that sometimes we are sideways as parents with our adult kids is because the parenting models that we got 20 or 30 years ago in the church were well-intentioned, but they were misdirected at best and dangerous at worst. And I saw a lot of people who said, well, you know what, the goal, like my goal as a Christian parent, and every once in a while I'll speak at an event or a conference, parents will come up and ask me this: how do I do a better job at disciplining my kid? And what they're saying is not, how do I correct my kids so that they look more like Jesus? But they're saying, like, how do I root out behavior that I don't like? How do I make them compliant? How do I make them obedient? Not necessarily for their spiritual development, but for my comfort and my ease of living. And I think there's two kind of ways that we can look at parenting, and our frame really does matter. One frame is My child was born with a sin nature, and it's my job to stamp it out. And another frame is, it's my job to spiritually form my child. I want to see where God is at work within him or her and help tease that out. So if Luke chapter 1 tells the story of an angel speaking to Zechariah about who John the Baptist is, Luke chapter 2 tells us about the birth of Jesus, and we hear this line describing Jesus' life as a child. We don't get a lot of descriptions about what was going on in Jesus' life between like when he was born, the 8th day when he was circumcised, I think day 40 when he was presented at the temple, and then when his family goes to Jerusalem for the Passover and loses track of him when he's 12. Like, we don't have hardly any descriptions of him at all. We don't have any descriptions of it at all in the scriptures, except for this one line. Luke 2:40 says this, "And the child grew and became strong. He was filled with wisdom, and," here's the line I want you to get, "the grace of God was on him." And now, I could hear some of you who are parents say like, well, Steve, of course the grace of God was on him. He was God incarnate. Like that was a unique child. But let's ask this question. Let's suppose that the grace of God is on every child. And that part of our job as parents is not just to highlight and circle and zoom in on and pick apart all of the things that we don't like. Because my guess is if you love your child and you have dreams for your child and you feel like they have lost a path that would lead them to their best life, you're going to go out of your way to sound the alarm. Let them know that they're making mistakes. Let them know that they've wandered from the path. Let them know that they've gone wayward. But my guess is you only have to tell your kid once that you disagree with either their direction or a choice or a batch of choices in order to register the point. And some of us have hounded our disapproval over our kids and just bludgeoned them with a reminder that they are not choosing what we think they should choose. And that can happen when they're 6. It can happen when they're 16. It can happen when they're 62. But what if Luke 2:40 was a different frame that we took with our kids? And instead of saying like, oh, I don't like this about my kid, or they've got these character issues, or they don't go to church the way that they used to, or they're not in a small group, or I know that they're not tithing, or you fill in the blank. What if the different question was this? God, will you show me where your grace is at work in the life of my child? Will you, in the spirit of Luke chapter 1, will you turn my heart towards my kid? Not towards the idealized version of my kid, but towards who they really are in this season of their lives. And will you lift my focus from the weeds, where all I can ever see is what's going wrong, to above the waterline where I can see where your grace is at work within them? Because the truth is, if God is turning our hearts towards our kids, then he's also going to be opening our eyes towards the work that is gently and sometimes barely visibly unfolding in their lives. So ask this question. It could be that the enemy is just trying to shame you through fear to try to lean into your kid's life. But what if God, by his grace, was inviting you to envision a new version of that child's future in partnership with God? What would that relationship look like? How would the needle move in the next week if instead of you railing on what's going wrong, you were just say, God, will you reveal to me the ways that your grace is resting on my child? What might God say then? And what would it look like for you to both pray and believe that God was restoring your heart toward your child? The New Norm is produced and distributed by Winning at Home. Winning at Home is a faith-based nonprofit committed to making individuals, couples, families, and businesses stronger through counseling and coaching. For more information, visit winningathome.com. I'm your host, Steve Norman. Thanks for listening.